Welcome to the Monday, September 11th Education Committee and Supplementary regular meeting of the Board of School Directors. I'd just like to take a moment of silence in remembrance of those who lost their lives on September 11th. If you could bow your heads. Thank you. And I will turn the meeting over to Mr. Copeland.
Thank you, Dr. Van Lynch. One of the things that we ended the year with was the opportunity to take a look at some of the things we were doing in the strategic plan. I think it's a good place to begin the year. We had our first curriculum committee meeting of the board, and Dr. Everslav was able to give a summary on the strategic plan and also introduce some new work that we're looking to do in the 9th grade English curriculum and some of those revisions, which are also associated with the strategic plan. So, there he is, Dr. Everslav.
Thank you, Mr. Copeland. Good evening, everyone. Happy Monday. Thank you for coming out and joining us as we talk a couple of presentations which we're excited about, both strategic plan driven. The first of which we're going to provide a little bit of an overview and an update on the strategic plan. And on behalf of the co-coordinators of the plan, Ms. Megan Schaefer and Mr. Jason Potton, I'm pleased to share with you an update. So we have used this venue, the Curriculum Committee of the Board and the education meetings of the Board, to share with the community, the Board, the administration, updates about the strategic plan throughout last year. And we ended 2016-17 very pleased with the progress that we have made, very pleased with the investment of our professional staff in our community overall, and a great deal of energy around the strategic plan. So just want to share with you a little bit of the framework of the plan, some of our communication plan to start the year, briefly about some celebrations on 16-17 and some of our endeavors in 17-18. Starting with our communication plan, we at the end of last year, at the close of 16-17, we offered a summary of the strategic plan, what we called explorations. And throughout the plan, we explored a lot of different things that were ideas that had originated from the strategic plan. Those were summarized and captured in the 2016-17 annual report, which, while it is a relatively long document, has a lot of information about the explorations that we have pursued and the celebrations of the 16-17. So we ended last year by reminding the community that is a resource that is available, and started this year the same way. It is still posted on the school district website. In our opening communication, we referenced the annual report. We reviewed the annual report with our new staff that joined us this year, and it's really been kind of a touchstone for people to connect with the plan. We are starting this year as well in welcoming our families to join us for the open house, to share with them many talking points around the strategic plan. We've created a one-page overview sheet. It's a front to back sheet that is going to be just on display and available to staff and parents. in the offices of all of the schools, and that as parents join us for open house, they will learn also not only good things that are going on in the classroom, but they certainly will get an opportunity to learn about some of the highlights and talking points of the strategic plan that we're excited about. So just to kind of ground us in the plan is driven by 5 pathways: redefining success, spirit of community, transformative curriculum, student-driven schools, and a commitment to professional learning. And from these pathways, many explorations originated, many ideas from students, staff, administrators, when putting their heads together, came up with many explorations that originated from each pathway. As is example of many of the explorations, there's a lot of overlap and intersection amongst them. Several celebrations throughout the year. One that we had last year that we were really excited about on the teacher level was we created transformative goals. And one of the things that you'll hear in both presentations this evening is how the transformative goals that we've set for students that are really aspirational, how they've driven our work and how they've driven both on a day-to-day basis in the classroom and some of our broader curriculum and district initiatives. So one of the things that teachers did last year, which was really exciting, is they went through this process of upgrading their units, and what we call an intentional unit upgrade process, from which they took the transformative goals, which are shared here, that, as you can see, are aspirational, and they're falling in three categories: personal, culture, and global. And teachers put their heads together and looked at the units that they had in place, and how through the lens of the transformative goals could upgrade those units for students to enhance the student learning experience. It was a really energizing experience for staff. It was also an experience that resulted in students really getting more deeply engaged in learning. So the transformative goals, as I mentioned earlier, have really driven our work, but as we have seen through our work over the summer and last year, for the transformative goals to really take form, it's a time-consuming process. And we go through what's called an unpacking process. So the unit upgrades that I just mentioned were an example of how teachers are taking their current units and upgrading their units. But the transformative goals also drive our curriculum revision. So the second of the two presentations this evening, which will be far more entertaining than the first, will be by our Dr. Pratt, our secondary humanities supervisor, and two ninth grade English teachers that really talk to us and share with us some really exciting work that they've done about how much like teachers have involved in the upgrade process of their units, the ninth grade English teachers as a team collectively looked at the curriculum as a whole and basically are enhanced and upgraded the curriculum using the transformative goals. And they'll speak to much more eloquently than I will how the examples of that will take place and what that look like for the student experience. But that's a really exciting process. And another example of how the transformative goals have driven our work has been the process of the revising the elementary report cards. Now, the elementary report cards have been, our fourth grade teachers began work throughout the year last year, and then worked in June and again over the summer with Ben Akalik, who's one of the co-creators of Habits of Mind, and also a key influencer in our strategic plan. And that work continued as we started the year with the working with the fourth grade teachers on the elementary report card. And what we've done with that group also has been energizing, and it speaks to how deep and challenging it is to really unpack a transformative goal into what it looks like for our students. So I'm just going to share one example of what that has looked like from the report card process and give you an idea of what that process results in for students. So if we start with, on the bottom, the transformative goal of aspiring that students are going to share stories, ideas, and points of view while engaging others to think interdependently and act collectively. We want to think of, when we have a goal like that, think of what skills or dispositions we would expect students to have or learn in order to realize that transformative goal. So we align those transformative goals with various habits of mind or dispositions. In this case, one of the habits of mind is we want students to be able to listen with understanding and empathy and to understand others. And so from that, the teachers in the fourth grade looked at, all right, where in their curriculum would students have the ability to develop that skill? What would that look like? And they ended up crafting what we call I can statements, where students have the ability to, as they're looking at their experience, they're able to kind of, through a metacognitive process, realize where they are in relationship to that goal. So they created an I can statement, which was quite simply a fourth grade developmentally appropriate I can statement for a fourth grader to say that I can listen, pause, paraphrase, and probe to understand the other person's ideas. So if students were going through engaged in a debate or a discussion, and they were self-assessing where they are in relationship to that I can statement, then that would be a small step, one of many steps on how they would go to how they would help realize a transformative goal. In addition to that, there were other explorations, and these are just some of the explorations that we looked at last year that are in the implementation stage. We have increased physical activity at the elementary schools, revised the middle school schedule to include more student choice. We've developed maker spaces and worked on developing maker mentality. Our elementary teachers, through staff training, the first week back, were engaged in actually jumping in and engaging in these design challenges through the maker mentality and maker spaces. It was really fun to see them in action as they were going through it themselves as a means to learn how to help students, guide students through that process. We have explored and in the implementation stage for Genius Hour. Restorative practices was another exploration that we have engaged in staff training over the summer, and we're moving towards further implementation with that. And as I mentioned, the revised elementary report card through the lens of habits and minds and the transformative goals. While we are doing that with the fourth grade teachers this year through a pilot, we're also at the back end of that working on the other grades so that they will be in a better place for this adoption moving forward. In addition to the celebrations of those explorations, we have a research and development team that has been led by Christina Paul. They continue with the focus on student health and wellness issues. And through that process, we are examining not only our own practices as a school, but our curriculum in the areas, as well as providing education for students and families. And the three primary research topics that have been taken on by the R&D team have been recess and physical activity at the elementary schools, student sleep and school start times, and mindfulness in our schools. Our October curriculum committee of the board meeting will include a presentation about our progress on school start times. So we are looking at a variety of explorations moving into 17-18. So as the annual report indicated, many of our explorations have resulted in implementation. Others are continuing, and still there are some new ones that we're jumping into in 17-18. And we are looking at student-led leadership conferences at all four secondary schools. Rethinking policy around homework, graduation requirements, grading practices, and restorative practices more formally. We are continuing our work with Habits of Mind and reporting student progress in a much broader sense with a deeper narrative. And we are improving our assessment literacy and expanding feedback to learners. And we're also looking at the high school alternative school, an interdisciplinary program at the high school as a way to explore the interdisciplinary programs that have been so successful at the middle school level to see what they could possibly look like for students at the high school level. And we are looking at what we're calling residencies, or they're basically embedded field trips. They're guaranteed curricular experiences for all students. So one of the things that we've seen through our process of looking at field trips is we have some schools that have really outstanding field trip experiences that are deeply aligned to the curriculum. Those experiences aren't necessarily experienced by everyone in that grade level across the district, and we're looking at ways to partner with different organizations in the community that may align with our curriculum to enhance those experiences for students. So that's a brief overview of some of the explorations for 17-18. I certainly will take any questions that you may have, but I do encourage members of the board and the community to peruse the website and to look at the 16-17 annual report, and certainly the 17-18 kind of opening flyer that we'll be sharing with the community.
Thank you, Dr. Eveslage. Want to open it up for questions at this time? Any questions from board members? Diane?
Thanks, Scott. Just a quick, like to delve a little deeper into the high school alternative school interdisciplinary. Are you just getting started on that? Have you done some work on it? Is it something that you're looking to do in the future? Like, where are you in the process of evaluating and working on that?
So we have visited a couple schools that have high school interdisciplinary programs, a couple different models, but we're still in the very early stages of what that would look like.
Do you have an expectation of whether are you hoping to have a recommendation of some sort in the spring? Or are you still not even that, is it not that formed yet?
We're hoping to have a recommendation in the spring for a pilot for the 18-19 year.
Great. And just one other question. I applaud the working on the sleep and school start times issue. I have to say that almost every day I get something in my inbox about another school district making the change or another organization, promoting the change. And the latest one is you're going to save, I don't know, I forget the number, $9.8 billion a year by, I don't know how valid that is. I didn't really look at that. But I mean, I just feel like we're getting something every day on that. And I'm really looking forward to that presentation.
Lori?
Maybe I missed this, but when we've been talking about the updated elementary school report cards, and I just also wanted to get a sense on timing and rollout, and is that imminent? What's the?
It's occurring this school year.
Okay.
So the fourth grade will be piloting the new report card. The timing for that is the parents of fourth graders will be getting a letter from me tomorrow. And they also will hear from their teachers and see a presentation at open house this Thursday at the elementary open houses. And their first trimester, the report card will be, they'll because we're in the pilot stage, the current report card will still be in place for the year as the official record for school. But the parents will receive the revised expanded narrative after the first trimester. And the second trimester, they'll receive both the narrative and the full report card.
Okay, just one thing I would encourage us or, you all to do, because I think just to explain to all the parents that this is going to be piloted in fourth grade, so there's not a lot of, discussion about, why is this, I don't know, that people quickly get confused. So just maybe letting folks know in advance or making sure all the principals clearly communicate that, just so.
That's a good point about communication to the other grades, certainly.
Yeah.
We can include that.
Okay.
And
thanks.
perhaps it's inartful to say the elementary report card, because we're looking at is what would be appropriate at certain grades.
Sure.
So it wouldn't be the same.
Yeah, and I guess the other suggestion I have is maybe at the end of the year, after the pilot is done, it would be good to get feedback, I'm sure you're planning this, from the parents.
So we have two plans for the conference periods. One is the November conferences. We'll be sharing some materials with parents, and then the March conferences, we're going to have a feedback mechanism as they're handed as they're getting their initial report card, the initial new report card. We'll have a feedback mechanism to make sure we get that feedback before we make a final recommendation.
Okay, and also from the teachers, because I know one of the reasons we're doing this is because the report cards we have now don't convey a lot of information, so everyone's going back to the teachers to get kind of the real story. And so if this makes that process more efficient for the teachers, I think that would be good too.
Melissa?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I just want to make it clear that we had this presentation at the last curriculum committee meeting of the board, in which we discussed a lot of this in detail, and in particular, the communication plans. So I really appreciate that we're going to be using the open houses as a mechanism to get more information about the strategic plan out. And so I look forward to hearing back if that's kind of an effective way, because I think one of the things we've been concerned about is that the strategic plan, I mean, we've been going and reporting on it in updates of either, sort of smaller updates or much larger updates in the annual report and the website. It's not clear how many parents in particular are sort of getting the message out about what is going on with the strategic plan and how we've been implementing it. And I think we've been talking about the fact that school-based communications may be more effective, or in conjunction with other types of communications may be more effective, because that's where most parents and families are getting their information. So I'd be curious to hear how that goes. But I really appreciate that we're reaching out in that way. So thank you.
Any questions? Maureen?
Yeah, can you just comment a little bit if someone sees this or sees what you're working on and has ideas or would like to get involved, where would they go for more information and how can they get their thoughts into the process?
We have well, certainly at any point, people can reach out to me directly. We added as a footer to every page in the annual report, if you have any questions or feedback, you can email all forward at lmsd.org, and we do check that email regularly for feedback. But certainly any of the coordinators, and we have our pathway leaders as well, solicit and accept feedback. Thank you.
Any more questions? Any challenges, Dr. Everslot? When we present it, it looks like, it just kind of comes together, but certainly we know the aspirational nature of the strategic plan and essentially the heavy lift of doing this work on behalf of our students and ensuring that we pay close attention to their teaching and learning over the course of their journey here at LMSD. What challenges continue to present themselves or things that we're working through to ensure that we can really fully implement the plan?
I think one of the challenges that we've faced is just making sure that we have consistent communication. Sometimes when we have explorations, we have really dedicated people working in pockets, and making sure that information is disseminated to all the proper stakeholders in the appropriate time is challenging, and we're constantly revisiting that. It's not met with resistance, but sometimes just uncertainty or unknown.
Was that your?
Yeah, I think that, just the term stakeholder sometimes means you want to hold on to the stake you've got. And that means it's harder to experience something new. So I think communication, as Scott talked about, supports that. I also think that it's one thing to talk about being bold, it's another thing to actually do it. And so, when we take these steps, sometimes it's a leap of faith, and it's not an unreasoned one. But moving into action sometimes isn't as easy as people think. But we're getting there.
Oh, please, Ms. Paula.
Dr. Veslach, thank you for the presentation. I just have a question or maybe a statement where you have the transformative goals drive our work, and then you have transformative goals and the habit of mind, and then disposition, student I can statement. When these exercises are being performed, like for instance, it says listening with understanding and empathy. So I'm supposed to listen to others with understanding. I'm supposed to be listening to others with empathy. I'm supposed to be doing all of this. What happens to me? I'm learning to understand what other people think, or feel, but what about the individual? Will that individual hopefully not be lost in trying to empathize with someone else, but then who's empathizing with me? Is that clear?
It is, and I'm not sure if there's a direct answer to that, other than one of the things that we've talked about when we look at the transformative goals or the habits of mind is that when you talk about one, you're often talking about multiple, and rarely are you talking about one specific habit of mind in isolation. And so I would argue that if you are one listening with empathy, you're taking a step towards improving yourself in a way that would help realize a transformative goal, which is something that would benefit you. And I also think that when you have a culture where students are listening with understanding and empathy, that becomes a norm that benefits all, and you would have that, you would receive that as well. Certainly, we want a culture where everyone feels as if their perspective is validated.
Any additional questions? Thank you, Dr. Everslot. You call on the next.
Yeah, I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Pratt, our secondary supervisor of humanities, and two of our wonderful ninth grade English teachers, Ms. Jess Kane and Ms. Laura Stibitz. Ms. Kane from Harriton and Ms. Stibitz from Laurel Marion. We're going to talk about the ninth grade curriculum.
Thank you. So I think So this button is the click?
You can go here.
Okay, I would just rather click.
Okay.
Can I just click one button? That button?
It's not gonna be, it's gonna have to be these.
That's awesome.
Okay.
All right, so to move the slides forward, it's the arrows. Okay, great. Sorry about the delay, we're all Mac people there, so trying to get acclimated to the PC. So my name is Leslie Pratt. I am the secondary supervisor of humanities. I'm also a former, some say it, recovering ninth grade English teacher. And so it is with great pleasure that I, along with some representatives of the English team, share the fruits of what has been a year's worth of work and thinking about what would be the most powerful experience for our students as they come into the ninth grade school year. As we're thinking about this work, I just want to echo some sentiments that came out of the board conversation as Dr. Van Lynch was talking about recognizing the heavy lift of this work and what it means to take something that has been successful for so long, that has worked so well for a large many, and to say, what are the ways we can do it even better? This has worked for a long time, but how can we feed better? And to think about what does it mean to actualize being bold. So to echo the words of our superintendent, Mr. Copeland, those two visions, that idea of actualizing being bold, at the same time we recognize the heavy lift, that is the work of the strategic plan. And part of what we're hoping to share with you today is what happens when that plan gets actualized. Like what happens when we take the ideal and we work to try to make it real. It's an especially exciting moment because it's a beginning, and beginnings are places where everything is possible. So ninth grade is the beginning of your high school experience. It's also ninth grade revision as one of the first courses to go through a full in-depth curriculum revision in light of the strategic plan. So everything in this presentation right now is about that moment of great excitement where everything is possible. And because this work is so exciting, because it's so valuable, because it's so real, and because we're dealing with an English curriculum, and sometimes there is no better way to express something than with poetry, I'm just going to open the presentation by sharing the last stanza of To Be of Use, which is a poem about what it means to do work in the world that's real. And so it's a poem that I'm going to share at the very beginning of the presentation, and then ask us to come back to at the end as we think about this work. So the speaker in the poem in the final stanza says, "The work of the world is common as mud. Botched, it smears the hands, crumbles to dust. But the thing worth doing well, has a shape that satisfies, clean and evident. Greek amphoras for wine or oil, Hopi vases that held corn are put in museums, but you know, they were meant to be used. The pitcher cries for water to carry, and a person for work that is real." And so the work that is real is the work of this revised ninth grade curriculum. And so as we talk about this idea of curriculum and share some of the framing work, we invite you to think about curriculum in its true etymological sense. And so etymology is a word origin, like where the word comes from. And if we trace the word curriculum all the way back to ancient Greek, curriculum is grounded in this idea of a current run. The curriculum is the set of lived experiences students in classrooms get to know and breathe every day. It's not just the resources, it's not just the lesson plans, it's not just the homework, it's not just the assignments. And so the work today is to try to give you a snapshot, a brief vision of what the ninth grade curriculum framework is. And to start us on that work, I'd like to give another round of applause for our two English teachers who are going to do some of the framing work for us. It's hard to speak
Great. Thank you, Leslie, and thanks everybody for the opportunity to be here tonight. I'm Laura Stevitz. I teach ninth grade at Lower Merion High School.
And I'm Jess Kane. I teach English at Harrington High School.
So I just thought we would start by sharing a little bit about our process. Where did we start? And I think it was way back in February where we first came together. And that that opening process, however daunting it may have been, was actually really valuable for me, and I think my colleagues felt the same way because it's very grounding. We started with, Leslie led us in a really great discussion about what is our center, and we actually like physically drew it out, markers and colors and all kinds of fun stuff, right? So we actually drew out like a pie chart, like how do we divide our time? How do we see ourselves in our daily practice as English teachers? Where is that? And there's obviously always a tension between reading and writing and literature and discussion, and how do we, like percentage-wise, how do we break that up? So it was in those conversations that we started, and I think that was so valuable because it really made us feel grounded in, we're not throwing up baby with the bathwater. We're not starting all fresh and new. We're starting with common values, and then once we establish that, we really kind of start to look through the lens of the strategic plan and apply what we established with the balance between content and skills. So that was really our process. That was, I think, really valuable and really energizing too, totally validating, and just, how refreshing to be in a room with other English teachers who are just as passionate about you all day long. And it's just, we feed off of each other. So that was a really special experience. So pretty much, that's where we started. We asked ourselves the questions of what do we really want readers and writers to be able to do, not just in ninth grade, but thinking big picture here too. So Jess is going to talk a little bit more about the rest of our process.
Yeah, and I've been very fortunate in having been able to work for this district for quite a long time and to work with many of the colleagues that we have in our room today. And so the advantage of that is I've seen kind of, as one of the teachers, this curriculum shift in many ways. So when we sat down, we came to this question of, well, how do we want to revamp it? How do we want it to look different? And kind of the great thing about being an English teacher is that it's kind of like the color black in fashion, and that it can work any way and with anything and with any situation. And so it took us a while to kind of get to that idea of what would be best. And when we went back to that question of what do we want our readers and writers to do, we found that the strategic plan was really meaningful to us because we looked at those different areas in the personal transformative goals, the cultural transformative goals, and the global goals. And we were able to pick kind of from each of those different sections. And as a result, we found ourselves moving from a curriculum that was just based on what we were reading and kind of fitting around that to these various skills, and also looking at how we can fit that with other departments like our history department in terms of how we can add research in as well.
And as we're talking about all of these details, we do want to point out that when designing a course, the course involves all 4 of these central practices. So we talk about a skills and practices orientation to a course. When you look at the 9th grade curriculum, there are certain core practices, certain ways of closely reading a text, certain ways of thinking about aspects of synthesis, skills around developing and honing voice and writing that are explicitly taught to students, and students are given an opportunity to practice. Added onto that are these larger thematic questions that guide the course. And we're going to talk about those in a second. And those are under the umbrella of having rich literature experiences. There are amazing works of literature. One of the hardest pieces of work is thinking about which text to use. There's so many great books and stories and poems and discussions and pieces of text that are digital and pieces of text that are filmed. So much is at our disposal. So narrowing and selecting becomes a challenge. And then providing opportunities for meaningful research. So as we're building that process of finding our center, we also have those 4 pieces that are touchstones for us in designing a curricular frame. So we make sure that students have both what Heidi Hayes-Jacobs talks about as a classical orientation in the liberal arts, as well as are able to think in ways that are more transformative and contemporary. And so our balancing act was really about having both. And so the next few slides talk about what this actually looks like in the 9th grade curriculum.
And one of the things that made us hardest to switch is that whenever we teach English, one of the questions we get often is, what are you reading now in your class? And so for us to kind of give up that sense of looking at the curriculum based on the book, was when we talk about going bold, that was kind of bold for us as English teachers. But the things that stood out the most was the 3 questions of how is story and language impacted by social, cultural, historical contexts, and then how is a text shaped by the culture in which it is written and also it is read. And that seemed to be something that fit really well with high school students, especially freshmen, who are trying to still get a sense of what the world was like around them, and the different texts that we wanted to pull from, and also looking at the possibilities of what we could add. Those questions just made the most sense, and we kept going back to why we teach English is to show kind of the world around us and the world that the authors felt that they were showing. And then in the second half of the year, we were looking at, well, what do we want our students to be able to do with their writing? What do we want them to look at when they read? Why do we read what we read? And we kind of kept going back to the idea that writing is a way for us to advocate for ourselves and for others. And so we looked at that piece of the strategic plan, like in terms of what is our responsibility. Around that same time, we were also kind of looking at our intentional unit upgrades. And some of our unit upgrades kind of fell along the lines of advocating for students who might be transgendered and how to give them more empowerment. So some of that kind of came into that as we were looking at texts like Kite Runner, that kind of dealt with that. And from that then, we kind of shifted to this really great community cause project, which I want Laura to talk about this way.
So it's hard to say that I have like a favorite part of this new curriculum because I think it's all just so exciting, but definitely the community cause project resonates with me, and I think it's going to resonate with a lot of students because it truly is getting them out of the box of I'm a student in Miss Stiebitz's English class or I'm a student in Miss Kane's English class. They are seeing themselves really as citizens and community members. I was thinking back actually to the opening day when some of the students came. The seniors talked about one of their most memorable experiences, and all of that, I was struck by how vivid their memories were, but also how they were all connected and that they were all experiential. They were not, tests or quizzes, obviously, essays, but not sitting down at their desk, but truly like getting up and acting out and testing the boundaries of what is a classroom really supposed to be like. So I really think that the students are going to latch onto this. I think it's going to be engaging and accessible for all students. And I think that it's going to give them a ton of amazing practical experience for, they're in 9th grade, but moving forward, I mean, how to articulate, first of all, how to frame a research project. So you start with a question and you look at your own community, but then grounding it in research as well. So they're going to do an annotated bibliography. They're going to have opportunities for revision with their proposals. So it's going to have a lot of very practical applications while, inviting them to really run with their own personal interests. So I'm thrilled for that. I think, obviously, I look forward to continuing the conversations with our colleagues at Harriton to say how to go for you guys and what can we do next time and how can we make it better. But I certainly believe that this is going to be perhaps one of the most memorable experiences and practical experiences for 9th graders. Yes, go forth to serve, right?
So when we looked at another way that our strategic, thank you.
I forget, yeah. And do one more.
When we also look at ways that our strategic plan guides our work, we were kind of also looking at some of the texts that students kind of felt were the most, favorite texts of the unit or the parts of the that stood out the most to them. And as English teachers, and also just in terms of what 9th grade English is like, we can't really forget Romeo and Juliet. We were looking at this again, like, do we shift away from it? How do we approach this? And in talking, one of our colleagues, Ted Connolly, brought up the point that, why do we read this play that's hundreds of years old? Why do we make kids, read iambic pentameter and do this close reading? And it kind of goes back to this idea that the story itself is pretty timeless. And so when we were looking at shifting things, we were looking at ways that we could still keep some of that close reading and analysis, the stuff that like us English majors really get excited about, the stuff that students who love to read and write enjoy analyzing. But how can we also use it to empower our students and empower writers like Shakespeare and empower other people who are inspired by it? So in looking at Romeo and Juliet, we decided to kind of branch from that in addition to Romeo and Juliet, look at texts like this great documentary called Romeo is Bleeding, where and Laura will talk about it a little bit later, this gentleman basically uses Romeo and Juliet as a way to kind of advocate for this gang war that was going on in his area at the time. And also looking at other sociocultural approaches through just looking at ways poetry is used, not just as poetry, but as rap and as slam poetry and as spoken word. So while we're still doing some of that close reading, again, we're kind of shifting it back to that question of how does this text reflect the world around us, and how can we use it to reflect, our voices as well. Do you want to talk about?
Thank you for reading the slide, because I keep forgetting to do that. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about what our strategic plan, what the new curriculum is going to do in terms of the writing experiences. So as Jess was talking about previously, we were very heavily aligned with literary analysis. And of course, the English majors love that, but that is perhaps not a complete and enriching experience for them. So now we're going to incorporate, in terms of the guaranteed writing experiences, a broader practice and a broader exposure to different modes of writing. So we're going to do synthesis, research, and some creative pieces as well. So going on to our texts. So Persepolis is a new text that we're adding this year. It's a graphic novel, coming of age story of Marjane Satrapi during the Islamic Revolution in Iran. I'm thrilled about this one because it's going to enrich the students' experiences with what is a text, first of all, and it's going to enhance their skills with navigating not just the words on the page, but the graphic decisions that the artist makes, the zooming in. I mean, any kid that's interested in film or video, I'm sure could really relate to this in terms of what choices does the illustrator make with zooming in and the intentions of the moment. And this particular graphic novel is all in black and white, but still there's a lot to sort of unpack and analyze with those choices in concert with the text and the dialogue. So that is going to certainly invite some rich study for that. And then for digital text, so Romeo is Bleeding is a documentary. It's fairly new, features very deeply severed communities, and I believe California, right? So the kids, I think, it will be eye-opening. It's not going to be what they think of as the dusty old study of Romeo and Juliet. I think it's gonna wake them up, I think. And then the Lunchbox. I'm thrilled to be showing this film again. I showed it once last year. It's a heartwarming story that takes place in Mumbai. There are subtitles, and the characters are very relatable, but thematically it connects beautifully with Interpreter of Maladies. So I showed it last year as a precursor to Interpreter of Maladies because thematically it really warmed up the students to thinking about relationships and what cures us can be often most elusive, and maybe those that are the strangers are actually the ones that are closest to us. And it just so happens that all those themes fit beautifully into the Lunchbox, but then also are relevant to Interpreter of Maladies. So I think that acknowledges our work again, that we're not just in these units, these boxes of a unit. Now we're going to pivot to this book, and now we're going to do this book, but it's overlapping and recursive and things, and hopefully the students will make connections too between that on their own.
And that's kind of one of the things we kept wanting to keep in mind is what do our students want to, if I was a ninth grade student, what would I want that to look like? When my son gets to ninth grade, what do I want that to look like for him? And one of the other texts that kept coming up for our students is this book, The Other Westmore, which has been our summer reading for a while. And hands down, it is probably the favorite. They get this experience of reading a different text every year for one book, one school, which they also enjoy, but watching this author kind of parallel his life to this other man, also named Wes Moore, kind of starting in the same city and growing up with completely different experiences as a result of their surroundings is just something that was really powerful for them. So this is pretty much the work that we're looking forward to, and we're really excited about it.
And then as we move the presentation to closure, we think it's worthwhile for us to leave this discussion around the expanded definition of text, which is what we were just talking about. What does it mean to look at text in these really robust, complex ways? and to think about what our next steps might be. And so the work of building a curriculum is never done, because just as we want a curriculum to be a living, breathing experience for students, it's also a living, breathing experience for teachers. It doesn't just sit on a binder and a shelf. We're always thinking about what ways do we amplify it, which ways do we build it, what ways do we tweak it. These are 3 ongoing discussions happening right now in 9th grade learning communities across both buildings in terms of how the 9th grade curriculum gets made more and more real. So the discussions around what would it mean to create common 9th grade classroom libraries for things like literature circles. And to put that in more concrete terms, what would it mean, for example, to have 5 copies of Azar Nafisi's, reading Lolita and Tehran available for students who might be interested? And what would it mean to have sets, 2 or 3 books that might have been included in the curriculum available for literature circle reading, available for small group reading, especially texts that might connect thematically or might connect experientially. So the 9th grade team is thinking about what are those texts we literally want to surround our students in the classroom. Thinking about the idea of authentic audience. One of the things the strategic plan talks about is opportunities for more genuine publication and presentation. And publication doesn't just have to be a book, like publication as presenting and making public your work. What would it mean to hold a cross-building assembly between Lower Merion and Harriton students, where 9th graders at Lower Merion had an opportunity to travel to Harriton High School and publish, i.e. make public their work? What would that look like? What would the audience be? What kind of work would we want students to share? So those are questions right now that the group is thinking about. So we don't have answers to those. Those are kind of curricular questions. And then what are the possibilities for guaranteeing a curriculum-based field experience in 9th grade? Thinking about the ongoing work with the strategic plan around residencies and field trips that Dr. Evslog had alluded to earlier. Is there a place for some of that work in 9th grade? Or do we say, wow, the 9th grade experiences are so deep and rich, maybe that's grounded in 8th grade or 10th grade. But the idea that the 9th grade team is opening up that question, and not only opening it up among 9th grade teachers, but also opening it up to the department. If not here, then where? If not us, then who? So it was our honor and pleasure to talk about this work that, as I promised, I'm going to circle back around to the Marge Piercy quote, that's real. And that we wanted to share this in the spirit of the things that are genuine, because that's what binds us together. And that's what has really brought this 9th grade team, which is an exemplary team in every way. In all honesty, the entire team deserves so much credit for this work. It's really outstanding. So just thank you for listening to our presentation.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I'll open it up to questions from the board, please.
Add something. So, thank you so much again for the presentation. Again, we had this presentation at the CCOB meeting last week, although our teachers weren't there to sort of give all of the details, so we really appreciate you coming this evening. I know you weren't there because you were with your students, which is where you should have been. So we appreciate you coming, and it's very exciting, and it's really nice to have this very detailed example of how the strategic plan is sort of becoming, alive in the curriculum. So I didn't get my notes out to the rest of the board yet from the meeting last week. So I just wanted everyone to know that the curriculum committee of the board voted to put forward the resources that are necessary to support this to the facilities and purchasing committee, which will be coming up. So that should have gone out in an email, and I haven't quite gotten, so I just want people to know that that's what we had done, so.
Wonderful. Please, Lori.
Question, and I would love to take this class. I mean, the
Anybody's
passion.
welcome. Yes. Anybody's welcome.
Just your passion and thoughtfulness is definitely, infectious. My question for you, though, is there something, are our 8th graders going to be, I assume the answer is yes, but is there something that you're thinking about needs to be done to prepare them for this really kind of proactive approach to integrated learning, which is exactly what we hoped would happen as a result of the strategic plan.
Well, I'll speak to it first, and if you guys want to. Unless you want to go first. I feel myself smiling really widely because there's always a plan. There's always a plan for building something that sustains and survives one particular grade. When something exists in a small pocket, it's very difficult for that to become a system in ways that moves people. And so we started this work in 9th grade with the intent purpose of opening up conversations this year in both 10th grade as well as in 8th grade. And so to start with some of these same questions about center, but now those questions are even more complicated because we have one, dot on the grid right now. And so for us to think about what does it mean to think about our center in light of the strategic plan, which is already really heavy work, and now we're thinking about the work of different grades in light of the strategic plan. And so 10th grade and 8th grade are invited into that conversation this year. Already in place, we have something that Ms. Stevens had alluded to in the presentation that we're calling the guaranteed writing experiences. And so that idea of a vertically aligned progression of experiences that aren't just assignments. It's not everybody's going to do an Of Mice and Men assignment. But the way those assignments are structured, they highlight specific skills and practices that are going to get emphasized. And over the course of the last 2 years, English teachers 6-12 have worked to vertically align those experiences so that there's a meaningful build. There's also parallel work that is happening in terms of thinking about secondary reading, which is really challenging work. When we think about how we teach children to read, how we teach anyone to read, how we teach adults to read. We typically think about reading in terms of decoding. And, that happens in 2nd grade, like, they're done, like, now the kids can read, and let's kind of move on. The act of teaching people disciplinary literacy and teaching what it means to read at the secondary level, that was our first professional learning conversation of this year. Like, what does that mean, and how do we do that in ways that are systematic and vertically aligned? So there are already some pieces curricular that are in place to support that. So I wanted to share those with you. I also want to share with you the kind of the bigger vision of what the plan is, thinking about this work growing so that it's not something that occurs in just a pocket. So sorry for the very long answer to a very short question. So.
Other questions, please?
Can you give a more concrete example of a community cause project, and does that involve going out in the community, or is it more of a classroom project?
Yeah, I mean, I think we were thinking of that kids would throughout the year, through some of the texts that we were reading, look at some topics. One of the outside reading book choices that they would pick would be to research or read a book, kind of in vein of the topic that they wanted to look at. We were thinking of it in terms of, like, started with the idea of, like, well, what are they going to present? Would it be like an expo? And then we were thinking, well, how do artists, how do writers advocate for something? Some give a formal presentation, some make a mural, some, go out into the community and, build something or work with people. And so we wanted to make sure, again, kind of in light of the strategic plan, make sure that we were focused on giving students some choice, like not some choice, giving lots of choice, giving them freedom in terms of what that would look like. So I think it's probably a little bit vague in terms of what it would look like, but as long as it was a reflection of how students felt they could get their message about their topic across. It could be a public service announcement. We were thinking like the school, either the school TV channels or the Ramrick Reports, or we call it Harriton, but in Lower Mary, like, the TV shows that way, or they could do it on, every month we have like Black History Month, and students read like bits of histories and things like that. Maybe that's the way they kind of show it.
It's a good question because certainly I was thinking the same thing as these conversations came up. I thought this could be so daunting, right? How do we? So we actually started. It's in the works, but we started a Google Doc of just kind of brainstorming what could some possible topics be. And So it could be about language in the school, like what do you hear as language that could be derogatory that you want to confront and talk to your peers about and say, hey, that's not cool to use that word. One of the things that resonated with me that I thought was so cool is there are teenagers across the country that are talking about ways to embrace community in the lunchroom in the cafeteria, which is like the most petrifying place when especially when you're a freshman. So there's an organization, I think a website called nooneeatsalone.org. And then there's certain teenagers that created an app. So like if you're new to the school or whatever, you can like use this app to like go find friends to sit with in the lunchroom. So I thought those are some specific examples of ways that kids can really harness their own experiences to shape the direction they go in.
And I'll also add one other detail to that. When we think about some of this foundational work, the ways that this particular research project gets framed, it creates parallel to what we want students to do in an 11th grade synthesis project, as well as in the 12th grade senior project. So that idea of there is kind of an action, we're talking about kind of the action piece, because that's like the fun part, that's the part that has kind of all of the, has all the sizzle to it. But the idea of the foundational work that's necessary and the background that you need to build in order to make a public service announcement that actually makes sense. Like before you get to kind of build the thing, before you get to build the project, how do we invite, encourage, and require students to do the foundational work that's necessary for those products to be most meaningful? And so I think that's something that's really important, and something that has the potential to echo in other grades is where this builds and possibly connects into other vertical experiences. So I just wanted to highlight that as well, because that's kind of one of those pieces that for students we want it to seem almost invisible. Like here's this invisible scaffold, but that scaffold is so strong, that's what's going to build success for you when you leave.
Any other questions? Ms. Bollinger?
Thank you so much, and I'm like, Lori, you're just exuding so much excitement. I want to take the course myself. But what about our students that already have a challenge as far as literacy is concerned? And I'm just hoping that your enthusiasm has included them in the challenge so that they catch fire and begin to, implement what the strategic plan wants them to do. So,
That was one of the reasons why we did a lot when we were looking at shifting the curriculum. That was one of the reasons why we did it. Because we were finding that while, as lovers of English, we saw the value in a lot of these skills, it was a hard sell for students who see reading as daunting, or who look at their writing, or look at their writing and see it as, I can't write, so why bother? So that was kind of the whole reason why we shifted it. And then in shifting it, it allows us also some flexibility to be able to kind of work with the material, so that way we can reach those students as well.
I think, piggybacking on what they said, I think that the research project will give students a different experience about what is English like. It's not always just writing essays, right? Oh, so we get to do that. And I think it's really easy to scaffold that way too, and break it down, we talked about already ways that we can make the research more accessible for students of various levels, right? But then we're hoping that because it's their student project, it's their vision, that engagement will fuel their passion and their follow through, not just, I have to write this paper, this essay that was assigned to me, right? But they are innately driving this project.
So talk about voice and agency.
Right.
Could you share a little bit about some of the challenges you might find with colleagues who may not be as excited as you about the revisions and kind of the rebuild? If, essentially, we have a great English program. Why are we doing this? And knowing that there's a lot that we're asking with regard to the strategic plan and the pathways. So could you speak to what that looks like in terms of you selling it to other colleagues and how we actually start to sustain and embed this work for years to come?
Yeah, I think one of the benefits that we had in being given as much time to work together, I think one of the hardest things in writing curriculum is getting everybody who's teaching it all on the same page, because we all value what we do, and we
Right.
care a lot about the books that we teach, and we care a lot about the papers and the assignments that we do, and it's hard to give it up. And so I think we overcame that hurdle a lot. Again, I've worked at both high schools. I've seen how that they have kind of worked with each other and also sometimes against each other. And I can say that I think we are really proud of the fact that we have found we have found common ground in this curriculum. And then as a result, when we've talked to our 10th grade teachers, when we've talked to our members of the department, we've had a lot of support in that, because by using some of these larger questions, there's ways to kind of build off of it. We were really trying to keep in mind, looking at it vertically, how would this, if the 11th grade really wanted to kind of hold firm with what they have, how could this lead into that work? And so in terms of some of the challenges, I think there's maybe always a little bit of challenge in shifting it, but we've really been trying to be mindful of the people in other grades, including the middle school. So that way, it's not as big of a shift as it might seem kind of in presentation.
I also value the informal conversations I have with my colleagues that just happen naturally. I went out to lunch with a colleague that teaches 10th grade, and naturally our conversation started going towards thematic connections. So it's almost like if we just own it, you know what I mean? Like we're just going to own it and share it and celebrate it. And I think that enthusiasm will hopefully be contagious, rather than something that is forced or new or yeah.
And the kids, I mean, when I used to teach sophomores, students would come in and talk about what they learned in 9th grade, or when they switched over to different high schools. When you see the students excited about it, it gets really easy to buy into it as a teacher.
That's true.
You'll do
That's
anything
very true. Yeah,
to get them excited.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Presentation.
Thank you.
So we will now move to the audience recognition portion of our meeting. We'll take public comment on agenda or non-agenda items. If you could sign in with Ms. LaPera, there's a 3-minute time limit. And if you could give us your name and generally where you reside in the district, please, thank you.
Heather, you can come up.
Hi. Before I start, when I'm finished, I would like to leave a copy of what I wrote with you, just because I'm nervous about the time limit. And if I get cut off, my thoughts are important, and I would like you to be able to read them.
You're welcome to leave it with Ms. LaPera.
Thank
She'll
you.
distribute it for us.
Sure. My name is Heather Cronin. I live in Marion Station. I'm the parent of 2 children in the district. My youngest is a senior at Lower Marion High School. My oldest, Annie, is here with me tonight. She graduated in 2015. Annie went on to continue her education at Harcum College, graduating this past spring, #1 in her class with an associate's degree in animal center management. I'm nervous. As a result of her success, she received significant academic scholarship, and in 2 weeks, she will begin her pre-junior year at Drexel University, majoring in environmental science. And I'm here tonight to tell you how Annie got here. Annie attended K through 6 in another local suburban school district. It was clear by second grade that there were some learning issues. By the time she finished 6th grade, she was in completely supportive classes and still was not succeeding. It was not a supportive and cultivating environment. As I'm sure you're aware, academic difficulty often translates into social difficulties, and Annie was relentlessly bullied. Her self-esteem plummeted. As a result, between 6th and 7th grade, I made the purposeful decision to move into Lower Marion School District. In August of that summer, Annie and I met with her new IEP team at Ballackinwood Middle School, where we met Marissa McGinley, who was to be Annie's primary support teacher. Immediately, I knew I made the right decision. I was filled with so much hope as the teaching staff presented me with solutions and actionable plans. Most heartwarming was at the end of our meeting when Annie asked Miss McGinley a question about how the other girls in the school dressed. Dr. McGinley didn't brush her off. Instead, she sat with Annie and worked out a first day of school outfit, hair and makeup included, that would help Annie fit in her new school. And we both went home with a renewed sense of hope for the future. But Annie's path was still hard. Even at Lower Merion, she struggled. There were days I'm sure she wanted to give up, but she never did, in large part due to the support she was receiving at Lower Merion. The teachers at Ballackinwood and later at Lower Merion devoted their talents, hearts, and souls to saving my child, and save her they did. Within 6 months of the start of second grade, Annie was fully mainstreamed with support and learning the same materials other students on the college preparatory track. Annie was recommended for the NOW program in high school, where we met a second angel, Diane Werder. It was with the support of the NOW program that Annie received individualized instruction in a small classroom setting. She learned the same material as all the students. It was just taught in a way that she could learn. Over the course of 4 years, Annie learned not only the required subjects, but she learned how to advocate for herself, to use critical thinking and make healthy decisions regarding her future. Annie learned unique study skills and organizational techniques geared to her individual way of learning. In fact, during her time at Harcum College, Annie was employed as a tutor, teaching the very same skills she learned in Lower Merion to her college classmates. And in closing, I brought with me tonight a copy of my 2017 school taxes. For 2017, we paid $3,475.38. And if you could tell me where else today I could get comparable services for that amount, it wouldn't be possible for me to put a dollar amount on the impact Lower Merion has had on my child. But if you force me, $3,475.38 is the bargain of the century. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Jenkins?
Nice story. Ruth Jenkins, Wynwood. A couple of questions. 850 copies of those books. Are there 850 freshman students? Is that when they?
25 for each school.
425 for each school?
They're purchasing 425 for each school.
Okay. The other question I had was, and I know they're not here anymore, but there was a rich literature versus literacy-based. And I don't understand the difference when they say that it's going to be, that part of this system is rich literature, but then it's literacy-based. The other part of this discussion is levels of ability, number one. And the other thing is basically, is there team teaching so that the history teachers, the science teachers, and the math teachers are also part of this process? Otherwise, they're operating in a vacuum without, it overlapping into the history research and writing of science. And I also think that change is a good idea. Teachers often teach the same thing year after year, and change is always an energizing process. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jenkins. Dr. Everslot, can you respond to some of the questions?
Sure. Thank you, Ms. Jenkins. As far as the literacy-based, it's really a shift from studying a book to studying skills across multiple texts is the primary shift. And we do have interdisciplinary teams at both high schools in the 9th grade, as well as content area teams. So there are intentional efforts to make cross-disciplinary connections.
Okay. Thank you very much for joining us. We are adjourned.